So, when we try to understand trauma, how do we define it?
Don't you think the amount of xenophobia that we're seeing in the US and Europe also comes from this?
If I give you 90 seconds right now, what would you like to teach?
So, where is the hustle culture even coming from, and who is enforcing that on us? Somehow we have forgotten track of how to be just happy.
As we always know that we want to know the curious mind within us, what goes on in building something that scales cultures, wherein we are calling ourselves borderless builders, and to actually let us know how to build something that scales, let us know about trauma. We are joined by the most amazing Miss Mathangi Swaminathan. She's been founder and CEO of Parity Lab, a Harvard Kennedy graduate, and she's building an entire global social enterprise, and she's helping us reimagine how gender based violence is there, how we see trauma, and how the parity goes on. So instead of, sometimes we stop, like go to shelters, we are actually trying to work with her on a healing centered model, which is that's something that she's going to talk about. And the most important thing that I'd like to mention, and it's so great that you let us know that you have helped more than 100,000 people in this space. Your organization has reached out and touched lives of more than 100,000 people. So thank you so much for joining us, Mathangi, for this conversation. I'm so glad to have you over here with us.
Yeah, so excited to be here, Yukta.
I would love to know and understand when you started building the Parity Lab and figured out that you want to be in the social entrepreneurship space. How are you going to fight the gender based violence space? And specifically, when you yourself had have lived in different parts of the world. So, how did this entire concept came around you?
Mm, yeah. Uh, I think so. I've been working in the social impact space for the last 15 years or so. I remember doing my MBA at the Indian School of Business, ISB in Hyderabad, and I'd worked for, in the corporate for a couple of years. I was just feeling so misaligned. I was terribly bored. And I wanted something much more meaningful in my life. I was in my early 20s. I'd also gone through a very abusive relationship in my own life. Uh, and at that point, I didn't even have the language to speak about it. I'd not heard the word trauma. I'd not heard the word gender based violence. I didn't even know what my body was going through. But I knew that something was off, right? Like when, for example, when someone would like raise their voice, like I would feel my heart beating, right? Like I would really struggle to raise my hand and like speak up in class. I would get very nervous in certain situations, right? It had a huge impact on my self esteem. But I knew there was something happening. I just didn't have the words for it. And so the next, it's been more than like a decade. I've spent my life either working or researching or really understanding the core roots of trauma and how do we build a trauma literate world so that we can really lead much more functional lives of joy. And that's kind of what led me into starting Parity Lab during the pandemic, when domestic violence was declared shadow pandemic, and I felt, oh my god, like look at the amount of trauma that's unfolding in the world, like this is the right time to start.
Wow. And when we talk about it, and as it's a very soft topic for a lot of people are not comfortable sharing this. Like I still remember I was speaking with a friend of mine, and he was sharing his experience. I told him, "Oh, hi, I think I know this friend of yours." And he's like, "Oh, yeah. When you meet her, the first question she's going to ask you with hot dogs in hand, what's your trauma?" And you'd be like, "What?" Like, I'm just having hot dog and have to answer this question. And so some people I've seen take it very lightly because they don't want to talk the depths of it, and some people treat it as something they're uncomfortable sharing. So how do you break that barrier when it comes to this? And then how do you carve entrepreneurship model across it? Because most of the people would treat it like, oh, it's a therapy space, it's a mental well-being center or company that she's created. So how do you break that barrier with people? And second, position it as an entrepreneurial venture, not just like not just something that people just think, oh, it was therapy, which is not there at all.
Mm, yeah, it's a really good question, right? Because at the core, we are talking about psychological safety, right? Like, how do you create psychological safety in the hearts and minds of people? The point is not for us to keep sharing our trauma everywhere, right? The point of it is to for us individually to feel psychologically safe in our own bodies, and then to create systems where the people we engage with are also able to feel that safety. Like that's the goal, right? And so sharing trauma as a way of storytelling helps people heal sometimes, but it can also end up being quite extractive. Like the example you said, if the other person isn't ready to share their story and we ask them, what's your trauma?
Yeah.
Probably not the most trauma informed lens, right? So
Right.
so really we want to create that sense of psychological safety both within like my own body and in the hearts and minds of the people that we work with. Like that's the shift, right? So our goal has always been, how do we shift from a very therapeutic one-on-one model to creating trauma literate individuals, trauma literate systems? For example, right, like in like a very practical example, these days toxic workplaces is a thing. Most of us have worked in a toxic workplace. We have heard bosses yelling at us, uh, like kind of like absolute lack of boundaries in when they reach out to us. It's expected, a lot of gender bias coming from sexual harassment. Toxic workplaces have become extremely common, right? So in such a situation, a therapy session is not going to fix a really broken system. What we need is a system that functions in a trauma literate way. And what some of those components that include are going to include like psychological safety for the employees. How do we include boundaries, right? And I don't mean physical boundaries only, I mean psychological boundaries as a way of functioning in organizations,
Right.
right? How do we actually have accountability and responsibility as a function? What sort of practices and support systems are we going to give these individuals, especially today when we really are afraid to talk about identities? Then how do you actually integrate identities to the workplace? Because we are going to have people with all sorts of lived experiences and still like function in a way that kind of takes the organization's goals and missions forward, right? So that's the shift we're trying to create from, oh, you fix it in a therapeutic session versus no,
Right.
like including family systems and corporate systems and friend systems have to be very trauma literate.
So, when we try to understand trauma, I mean, how do we define it? I think for a lot of people, the definition is very different. So, some people treat topics like on the extreme side, if they've been through harassment, if they've been through fire, for example, a fire in LA and they lost people, losing someone they're close to. But it means different things to different people. And I have not come across an intensity meter as of now to identify what it looks like. So how do we do that? I mean, in your language, when you were structuring this for organizations, for employees, because you would, I mean, since you're talking about this, you have an understanding and you have seen different cases wherein employees have been affected, and because of this trauma their work performance was impacted. So how do we exactly define trauma?
Yeah, it's a good question because we're talking about trauma responses, right? So even things that could mean, for example, one of the fellows we call the folks who engage with Parity Lab as Parity Lab fellows, and one of the fellows we engaged with was, for example, avoiding conflict at all costs, right? Like, let's take that as a situation. On the surface, it could mean just a personality trait. It could mean something that she's learned from her family, right? It could mean a systemic pressure because women really, really don't want to, they want to avoid conflict because of all sorts of reason. Or it could be a trauma response, right? And so really understanding where that's coming from, right? Is the conflict avoidance coming from a traumatic experience in her own life? In which case, trauma resides in the body and the nervous system, and we have to really work with it and resolve that. or or like what, really understanding the root cause of it, right? Like that's how we uncover it. And so we see that both at a personal level, her own personal experience. We also see that at a systemic level, like how does the society push women to behave in certain ways, right? Like for the very common thing, right? Women being called assertive versus like kind of pushy and arrogant, right?
Yeah.
So there's also a societal aspect to it that's pushing. There's pressure on both sides. There's our own internal way of behaving and the external pressure that's kind of forcing us to behave in certain ways. And we have seen this across, right? We have seen this in women from rural India, for example, some of the most marginalized communities that we have worked with. There is a different kind of conflict avoidance, or there's conflict, like they actively seek conflict. There's you see different behaviors which are basically trauma responses. And how do we know it's traumatic? They are deeply unhappy. You see a lot of chronic body pains and aches and a lot of body issues, a lot of diseases that's cropping up, right? You see like lack of self-esteem that's cropping up. You see like they cannot function socially. They're unhappy with their social functioning. There's definitely uh, like sort of a resistance to seeking joy. Like it's their body's perpetually in like fight or flight mode, so there is like almost a resistance to rest, relaxation, a way to seek joy, a way to just be, right? And you can see some of these, like we define it as across 8 different categories. But you can see some of these characteristics and the person is generally unhappy with it, which is why they come to our program in the first place.
And I do get that. So how had it been for you? I mean, you did mention, like being a mother, being an immigrant, having coming from a background wherein you did talk about there were color differences. So how did you navigate these cultural and ethnic differences for yourself starting out?
Yeah. When I started Parity Lab, I was relatively new to the US, about 3, 4 years in. Uh, I'd come for my master's to the Harvard Kennedy School, and then I'd continued working in the child protection space in Minnesota. And that's when the pandemic happened. So I'd always wanted to work in the space of trauma and GBV. So I started bootstrapping it. And so for me it was twofold, right? Like one, the question was, am I like mentally ready, because this is very exhaustive work. So really like my own readiness, and my own readiness was that come like, am I afraid to do this work because it's just generally like scary to launch something, or am I just not ready? So I had to really do that internal calibration. And the second piece was, uh, I have I hadn't started up in the US yet, right? So for me, it was a whole new world. I had to learn how to fundraise. I had to learn to speak the language. A lot of people use trauma very casually, right? Or they see trauma as this something extreme. It has to be like a war crime or a gang rape, or like, and so people were very resistant to the idea that, oh, I might have some trauma responses in my body. So really like breaking through that shame and that guilt, and really like kind of breaking through that was a big deal. We also started off working with some of the most marginalized communities in rural India before scaling globally. So they were like our first sort of customer segment, and so that added another layer. Because like I'm not from that community, so I had to also kind of learn as we go along. And there's always a class, caste, race, all sorts of barriers, right? So on one hand, I was navigating all sorts of heterogeneity here. I'm a brown woman, I'm an immigrant, my accent, the way I look at things is different. But on the program side, I was kind of the one who was sort of superior in the caste, race, language, culture, right? So I had to navigate that, because I was working with people who were like, for example, we didn't have a word for trauma in Hindi when we started, right? So we had to literally like translate freeze, flight, fawn responses, and we had to like do a lot of westernized approaches, but
Yeah.
deeply contextualize it. So kind of I was in this mid spot where I was talking to people more privileged than I am, and then I was the more privileged person on the other hand, right? So that was a lot of like internal debate on like what's the right role, like how do I show up in these spaces. One of the biggest conflicts I had, for example, was in fundraising. There is this norm that you tell a person's story, you say, this person was like kind of deprived, they had nothing in place, and whoop, we swoop in, and like, we're the super people there, we did this, and suddenly this person like had everything. And that's the norm, right? And I was so against telling stories that didn't have dignity in them. Like, the women we work with are not deprived women, they're extraordinary women. The system had put violence on them, right? So telling the story differently, and also telling that they are awesome and we did the work, we both are awesome, was quite a challenge in itself, because that's not the norm that happens in fundraising, right? So every small thing, and fundraising is a very toxic culture. So people have asked me all sorts of questions, from like, why are you here? Like, you are a woman, like, oh my God, you have a family. So I've been writing a lot of Substack articles on the amount of gaslighting that happens in fundraising I've been writing quite a bit over the last 2 months, just to shine a light on, uh, toxicity is not just in certain spaces as we assume. Toxicity is everywhere. And I think when you start to see those patterns, it's an opportunity for us to say, this is not for me, or to shift our own ways of showing up in these spaces.
So, what's changing for you? I mean, I'm glad that you shared this aspect of how it had been difficult for you. But on the other side, a lot of people think that diversity is one of the, diversity is not a curse, but it's the best thing that happened when it comes to fundraising. You are in the social impact sector, which a lot of people feel that is not a revenue making sector. So I don't want to be in that sector. Then you're addressing something that people think that is very therapeutic in the trauma space, or you're talking about gender based violence, you're working with women. So if you look at it as a business case, it looks like a very positive and emotional case wherein it is easier to attract customers and attract fundraisers or investors into this. So, what do you think creates this problem, or is it a myth in the market that this is the case? But actually, when you go out, you face something that's totally different.
Yeah, we work at the intersection, as you said, of a social enterprise and mental health slash gender, and a very like an immigrant brown woman mom founder, right? So all the
Right.
identity part of it, right? uh, Philanthropy in the last year, especially in the current political environment, we have all seen the slash on DEI. So anybody working on diversity now, like, it's no joke. That's the current reality. Nonprofits in the US, about almost 85% of them are like very small nonprofits. Most of them, like, especially in the last, since USAID has been slashed and stuff. So many of them, I think the latest report was more than 52% have less than 3 months runway. So we're talking about a chronically deprived sector at this point. Just to lay some perspective, that it is not true that fundraising is easy, right? Like, the ones we see in the media, maybe a few here and there are like doing well, but the majority of them struggle to make ends meet. There's a massive lashback on the entire sector, right, over the last like 12 to 15 months. Uh, Gender by itself has been the smallest of the share, right? If you look at the whole philanthropy, gender has been less than 2% even during COVID times. And that's again, so it was like 0.00001% during COVID times. That was the amount allocated to gender based violence. So that was in COVID times when people were actually giving a lot, right? So now, like, so you can imagine the lashback on that. So just to lay some perspective that that's not true. Funding for gender has drastically gone down, and philanthropy has drastically gone down over the last year, right? For us, I think I think it's a challenge and a blessing, because uh, who I am helps me do my work a lot. There's a lot of trust built, right? Like, for example, in some of our global fellows, when I share my story as a founder of an organization, I see that trust building happens a lot faster, right? There's a lot more, we have a lot of reflective storytelling sessions. In 2026, we are launching a lot more shorter formats of workshops. So when you are the way you are, your identity carries a lot of credibility with you. So most of our programs are with entrepreneurs. So seeing a brown entrepreneur, seeing a mom, seeing all these identities I carry helps me do my work a lot better, right? So that's the value of diversity. And the second piece is, yes, on the fundraising piece, unfortunately most of the funds are held by a lot of privileged folks, right? So that's the barrier we're trying to break. And one of the things we're actively trying to do over the last year actually is to make this more revenue generating. So we're launching a paid platform, for example, this year. Some of our fellowships are like sliding scale paid. We're also launching shorter formats of workshops that are paid. So we are kind of shifting also to make ourselves more sustainable. So it's like both ends of the spectrum, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you try to understand this, is like a great friend of mine wanted to build a social impact space in sports for women in India, and he wanted to, because of his disease now it delayed, but he wanted to go to University of Edinburgh and then get a women's sports culture wherein it's safe and women have more opportunities, and it's like, because I got a chance to be in India and attend a 10-day space for women wherein they're actually treated like it's like if you're good for the business, you are in the game. It's actually worse than a sports team. If you are not performing well, you are out, and your emotions are not taken care of. And that's when I even felt that such women also face that career trauma wherein they feel unvalued or undervalued as well. And in a lot of spaces I've seen that happening, and people want to, like, at least my friend wanted to get into this social impact space, but he still could not crack the profit code. And again, he was also struggling to meet the ends meet. So what do you think, when you also, from the business point of view, do you think sustainability is the only thing one should aim for, or you can associate the term profit with terms about trauma, or with terms around as your title says, Parity Lab, so we know that that's a difference. So do you think associating that word gives a negative connotation to it, or it's okay if you talk about it? Because in the end, if you are doing work for greater good and you don't have funds to support it, how are you going to move ahead?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good framing. And I think that somehow women also have a lot of baggage with money, right? There's a lot of financial trauma that we carry, right? Like we have our own relationship money with money isn't so clear, and we have seen that across our fellows, across 8 countries, from rural India to Uganda and the US, and name it, right? There's a relationship problem with money. There's a lot of guilt if we earn it. There's a lot of overperforming to earn it. That's why we see, and you can see it across data, right? Like the amount of money that like women raise versus men raise. And it's also two ways. It's not just women carrying that. It's also the system enforcing it, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot. So when you see that women startups aren't able to raise money, it's less than 1%. Like that shows something about the system itself. So it's like being enforced constantly on who has the right to earn money, as if almost earning money is a negative thing, right? And then on the other hand, we have these like 8 billionaires, like trillionaires now, who own like wealth of half the world's population, right? So so on one hand, like I fundamentally don't believe that like earning money is bad. I think that if you do good work, you should be earning money, and earning money is a great thing. It makes you sustainable, uh, and and I think you should earn money, right?
Yeah.
I fundamentally believe that. So, uh, yeah, and if there is some guilt associated with earning that, then that's something that we have to work on, and also actively change systems around us. That's the kind of the two responsibility piece on us.
Yeah. So, have you ever dealt with these situations wherein you would have observed that financial stress or money has been one of the trauma cases? When you bifurcate, what kind of cases have you observed are most pressing, most talked about? So, if you had to rank in order of like one, two, three, so what would be your top three tier cases? Like this topic being one, topic being two, topic being three.
Mm. I think amongst entrepreneurs, I've almost always seen financial trauma play out. There is a hesitancy to ask for money. And also, again, because the system reinforces it, right? It's two way. It's not just her fault, right? It's not at all her fault. It's being reinforced, right? So almost always. And because there's so much violence happening against women, right? Like the number of children who are sexually harassed, the number of like amount of sexual harassment happening in companies. We know by now, like 2 out of 3 women who are married face domestic violence from their partners, which almost always includes financial withholding from her, right? There is a financial component to it.
Yeah.
So financial trauma is a huge piece of the puzzle. One of the things I always like want to explore is what is your relationship with money like. I think that's almost every single time an entrepreneur comes into our program, that's something we work on. And also because if especially if people work on say a non-profit model, philanthropy is so toxic, she somehow thinks it's her fault. So there's also a responsibility to like show the whole system, right? Like it's not just you. Look at the system, look at the amount of gaslighting that's happening, look at the questions that you're being asked, and look at the questions that your male counterpart is not being asked. Look at the amount of emotional baggage you're carrying, right? Like to help her really see that. The second thing is, I think sexual trauma is a big thing that we have seen
Yeah.
across, from like toxic relationships. We've seen that from like younger aged women, like in their 20s. We've seen how that impacts. Sometimes people keep falling into toxic relationships one after the other. And often that I've seen that comes from unresolved sexual trauma, either in their childhood or something in the parenting that's come up. So that's a huge deal. And the what's really tragic about sexual trauma is like your body is your first layer of safety, right? And when that's violated, it doesn't that energy doesn't leave the body so fast. And so we see that an inability to form relationships. There's like chronic mistrust. And so that's another like big piece we work on, both at like the personal level, but also kind of building her own self-esteem and seeing the bigger patterns of how it's not her fault. And when she sees her community, like 7 out of 10 people saying, oh, I face this too, there's a bit of like, oh, it's not me, like it's happening all around me, right? That big shift in mindset. Those are the top two. The three we see is more trauma behaviors is, for example, we've seen like chronic insomnia pop up. We've seen like a lot of body aches because of uh, because of not resolving their underlying trauma. So that could show up as like insomnia, like backaches. We have seen issues of uh, struggling to stay present in situations, a lot of over explaining. So we see these kind of behaviors pop up, which often has its roots in some kind of traumatic experience, which then we kind of unravel and work through as like a community.
So, in a conversation when you are speaking with someone, can you identify like what's the trauma or what are the excuse me, what are the areas that the person is struggling with? For example, like we go to a therapy session, the therapist tries to extract a lot of information within the first 2 sessions, like tries to as much as the therapist can, so that then maybe third or the fourth session is structured onto figuring out. But they need a lot of information from your life, your past, your relationships, your career to figure these things out. So how do you identify within the first conversation as to what might be, I mean, I think I should use the right word because we exactly in the first conversation cannot get to it, or maybe we can, like what might be the underlying cause, and how can then you help that person to get over it and then transform their lifestyle.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, Usually people know what's wrong, right? That's why they're coming to us, right? When they apply for the program, they've gone through the process. We have like certain questionnaires for them to fill. They know what brought them here. There's a reason they're there, right? There
Yeah.
is some chronic issue in their life that they want to resolve. And so they know why they're there. Most often, they also have a hypothesis of why that's happening, right? In my own case, I knew that something about my abusive relationship had there's a correlation there. I may not know like the deeper insights of like exactly how trauma functions, and maybe there's a childhood component. I may not know that, but usually people have enough insights to say, oh, I'm suffering from this, and probably this is the reason why this happened, right? Like, so that much they have. Then we also have, through our own journey, we have a lot of reflective storytelling. So that means like we give situations and ask, oh, like if you were the brother in the situation, how would you respond to this? Like, and when they say something, oh, why did you say so? So through these kind of questions we uncover in a group setting, on what else might be happening to that person. And the second component is we want people to also adopt that sort of literacy, that awareness into their work very intentionally, right? We don't want to make this a therapeutic session. It's not therapy. So then therefore we have certain frameworks. So we say, okay, like now let's take psychological safety. How are you going to integrate this to your own life, and how are you going to integrate this into your organization, right? So for example, one of our fellows is works in the Ministry of Health in Uganda, and she is now training midwives in trauma informed care. So these midwives often work with girls who are with adolescent girls who are pregnant. So a lot of sexual trauma involved there. So how can these midwives be more trauma informed, right? Like, how do they respond? How do they have boundaries? How do they ask these questions? How do you make sure we don't blame the girls, right? So not just that they are able to see themselves in the system well, but also able to integrate that actively into their work, which is, I think, how you actually propagate that trauma informed lens.
And since Uganda might be a third world country or a second world country?
Yeah, developing country, just like
Developing
I
country,
think,
yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
this is, I did not know about this concept unless 6 months back someone introduced me to it. So, do you think that the first world, if we compare the first world countries, the most of the countries in Europe and North America, with the rest of the world, wherein a lot of countries are developing and politics keeps on changing. So I'm not trying to bring politics over here, but do you think that a lot of people in these first world countries also suffer with underlying traumas? Since you talked about Uganda, that's how it picked me. So it bothers them, and they want to talk about it, but they don't. Like, what's the scenario? What's the striking difference that you've seen between, let's say, first world countries and the rest of the world when
Mm.
we it comes to addressing this topic?
Don't you think the amount of xenophobia that we're seeing in the US and Europe also comes from this deep, deep traumatic fear of being misplaced, of being displaced, right? Of being wiped, of being erased, right? The amount of like anti DEI thing that you're seeing now, right? A lot, since in this year alone in the US, the number of black women who have lost their jobs has been the highest in the last, I think, decade or so.
Oh.
So the amount of like the racism that you're seeing here, don't you think that has its roots in trauma, right? So I think it's a misnomer to say that uh, trauma exists in certain situations or it only exists in situations of poverty. I think the way it plays out looks different, right? It plays out maybe in certain more obvious ways, and here it's not that obvious. It's one layer peeled in. But the very fact that, for example, right, in the US alone, yesterday I was reading a report that more than 48% of South Asian women here have faced physical or sexual trauma from their partners. That's like 1 in 2. So we're talking about domestic violence at a whole other level. I think here it's not, you don't see someone beating a woman on the road, but it's still happening within households. It's a little more quieter. It's kind of inside. It's neatly packaged, right? It's not kind of just out there for you like you might see on the roads in Uganda or India, right? That's the difference, how it appears. I used to work in the child protection system. The number of black and brown kids who were separated from families is almost like, I think, if I don't remember the data correctly, 2 or 3x more than white kids. So you see a lot of racism appearing in policing, in child protection, in judicial systems, in immigration. Just yesterday we saw a woman who was killed by ICE, right? So there is, and of course that trauma is not going to just disappear. Her whole family is going to be traumatized for the rest of their lives,
Right,
right?
right, right.
So the way I think it appears feels a little more neatly packaged. I think that's, it's like putting like a neat gift in a bow, and you kind of wrap it up and it feels as if it's really neat. You're looking through the glasses and it's beautiful scenery out there. But I think in reality, like how it how it's affecting people is almost always the same. Sexual harassment rates, domestic violence rates are similar across the world.
So we think, and I could attest to it is because I still remember I was, and it's like you feel unsafe, you do. So I was in Boston and I missed a bus and there was a confusion and I reached out to a police and said that I don't know, but you dropped me home. I don't care, drop me home. And then they're like, they couldn't, the laws did not permit them to drop me home. And then they reach out to the traffic segment, which was like 20, 30 meters walking distance. That man comes and warns me that women stay right there. You do not move unless that bus comes. And I'm like, okay, I'm in a new country. I want to go home. And when I go home and I tell my friend that I had to walk 100 meters from the bus stop to the home, he's like, are you out of your mind? I'm like, what did I do wrong? I'm sorry I got late because I sat in the wrong bus and then the right bus didn't arrive, so I didn't know how to get home. And then he's like, no, you don't walk that 100 meter. Don't even,
Mm,
if like, it's like if you disappear, nobody would know where are you or you were just like gone. Now, when I was telling this to my friends later on, we made a laugh about it. But if you think at the depth of it, if it would have been, something might have happened by God's grace, it didn't. It would have been a situation turned, either at the bus stop because I saw that like under the sleeves exchanges started to happen. There were papers being passed out, and they considered me as a threat because of me. Two times the policeman came and talked to me. So I had glances there, and then I did not know that I wasn't supposed to walk that 100-meter patch walking. So it and I don't know if it's trauma, but I think it does make you feel unsafe in these situations, even though we do say that it's very safe. But the notion being out there that it's not safe and your safety is in your hands. And then if something happens, now that's a different trauma added to your minds, like your mind. And sometimes I think in these situations you are to be blamed for that it was
mm.
your fault. Not maybe the person was not aware, but then it becomes your fault more than the person who committed that kind of crime. The victim is at fault as well. So how do you deal with that kind of trauma with women? Because I think women are more prone to such instances.
Yeah. And what happens, Yukta, tomorrow when you walk out after say 8 p.m., right? Like what it does to your body, right? You're going to keep looking around. You're going to be kind of on like very kind of alert mode the next time, right? You're not just going to walk anywhere like after it's dark. Maybe you'll call a friend. Maybe, you'll have, like you have someone like following you on Google Maps. You call a couple of people, right? That's what we're talking about. You don't feel psychologically safe, so you take all these extraneous steps in order to create that notion of safety, but you still don't feel psychologically safe, right? And most of that is because of the systems around us, right? Like the police system, the man who spoke there, the way systems are set around us. If something happens, how is the society going to react to you? You're also living in an unknown country. If like something happens, people won't know how to reach out. So that's the trauma response, right? It's There's an event that happened, but this incident is going to change your behavior for the next few years at least, probably until you actually sit with it, right? And that's the trauma response that we're working on, right? How much of it is intentional, that okay, I do this, I feel safe, I do this because I need to be smart enough about my safety, and how much of it is just unintentional, right? You don't even know, like this operating from a sense of trauma. You're just
Right.
doing it because it's in your nervous system at this point.
So, do you think battling it is important? For example, the we live in a space wherein it's always said to be productive, do things, specifically when you do not have the responsibility of being a mother, or I think a lot of responsibilities, unless are not dumped on you, you have other responsibilities to take care of. You should be in that hustling space and keep on working. So, do you think that if you are like continuously not even thinking about these things and consumed with work, even have a work burnout, but do not get the time to process these things that goes within your nervous system. So do you think that affects the quality of work or the thought process, or do you think that the primary thing should be sit with yourself, firstly figure out if there is an unresolved trauma, and then get into the productive phase, or let the productive phase keep you busy and engaged to an extent that you don't even get to think about these things?
So, two things, right? One, we have to really question where the hustle culture is coming from. Like, who is benefiting from this? Because definitely the employees aren't, right? So, you see like high rates of burnout, and conveniently burnout being framed as a very individual issue. Oh, you are burnt out. So, you haven't like kind of set your life well, but actually it's the system that creating like putting so much pressure on this hustle culture, like you have to be productive every single moment of your life. Where is that really coming from? Probably some factory setting, like post World War II, when we wanted to create widgets, and here we are like doing the same thing to humans, right? When we had to create widgets in factory production settings, it was like, oh, you'd create 100 widgets, every widget you create is important, so do more. And that culture, we're using it today to raise kids, to like do very artistic passions, to create companies, right? So where is the hustle culture even coming from, and who is enforcing that on us? Because certainly the people aren't benefiting from it, right? Like high rates of burnout. You often see also like, especially the young generation being labeled as, oh, they're resistant, they're hard to engage, they're very unmotivated, they're kind of very where are these labels really coming from? Because we want them to kind of adopt our culture of, I don't know whose culture it is, of this extreme production, constant production. It's definitely not feminist, because like you can't hustle a baby out. It will still take its 10 months. You can't like hustle a baby to grow into a toddler, into a young adult. You need a lot of presence and emotional energy for that. It's definitely not something that's feminist. You often see like in companies, staff constantly putting out fires, right? There's no real fire. This is imaginary fire, imaginary deadlines. Nobody's dying, but everybody's putting out a fire that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So we really have to question where is that hustle culture even coming from, and who is it benefiting? It's certainly not benefiting the people, because we're seeing high rates of chronic depression, loneliness, blood pressure, one of the highest rates, right? Loneliness was declared a big issue, I think, couple of years back by the journal Health General Surgeon, right? So, so really, this productivity, we have to really sit and question that, like who created it, who is it benefiting, why is it even there in our world today?
And when I try to understand this aspect, like when I gave my first TED talk, I did mention that I did that a component of my TED talk was I did a survey, and we had a discussion with all the founders. And the biggest fear that came across was not the fear of not getting funding tech systems, but it was a fear of isolation, that is loneliness, that is building alone. And that was a key part of realization that even comes plays into business, because a lot with the reason that you and I met through a community, and we do see the community culture also coming up, because somewhere or the other we feel a sense to be belonged. Some people do say that misery needs company, but I do feel that it feels good to, like if you are drowning in some place, at least you have someone you can see, okay, if I'm struggling, this person is also drowning in the same boat, and we have a hope of being taken out. Of course, someone who's out there can only rescue now is because two people are in the same boat, but at least that feeling of I'm not alone in this, even if
Yeah.
it's misery. So I think that is important, which also brings us to a segment that we do. It's called 90 seconds to teach me something. So if I give you 90 seconds right now, what would you like to teach?
Mm. I think that trauma literacy is foundational. Just like we teach, say, financial modeling, we teach Microsoft Excel, we teach ABCs to toddler. I think people need to learn the basics of how trauma operates in families, in corporates, in organizations, in relationships. It's foundational to emotional intelligence. only then can we lead more intentional lives, and can we support people who depend on us, our kids, our parents, our families, like whoever's like, especially in caregiving roles, can we really raise healthy families and healthy organizations?
I'm really intrigued by how you have put it that it's important and it impacts the core of how we live in. Like we can work for hours and hours, but when we come to our family, when we want to, and specifically for women, because they are the ones who are going to be the caregivers, the people who are going to give the birth, that should not impact the future bloodline. And that's
Hmm.
important for them to resolve it at that point in time because whenever any person sees the future of starting a family. I think it goes for both the roles, whether it be a man or a woman. It's very important to treat it. Otherwise, then, when we see all these Instagram content of pushing it out there, the family's unresolved trauma that is pushed on to generations. For example, expressing love. It's very difficult for a lot of brown families to be very open about expression of love or in most of them. I think it's changing, the dynamics have changed a lot, but still in a lot of spaces it is very difficult or to be in that. And if we see with other people or other cultures, in some cultures it's very okay to express a very familiar love, whereas in some cultures it's not. So I think I mean, I appreciate how you have addressed the root cause of it.
And also, like shared caregiving, what you're speaking about, right? Often men don't want to participate in caregiving or household responsibilities because there's this fear that, oh, I'll be made fun of, I'm less of a man, right? We have to address some of those like fears and where that's coming from. And that's only going to come through trauma literacy, right? Like really having those open conversations. Only then can actual shifts happen, and only then will kids actually see equal parenting happening from the parents.
Yeah, that's what very. I think that's the cause of a lot of things as well. Like they would feel that they're uh, raised in a very positive space or a space which no like
Mm.
a very nurturing space to put it in the right words. And so I mean, I'd love to know, like we've talked about the trauma space so nicely, and we have this segment which is called Seven Questions to Fame. So it's a format wherein I'll be throwing seven rapid fire questions along your way, and once you feel you're ready, we'll be having a concise rapid fire session.
Okay, let's go for it.
Perfect. So the first question would be, what had been one incident that made you realize that you should be the voice of trauma?
Mm. My own healing journey took place across multiple components. I went to therapy, I went through certain leadership components at the Kennedy School, I went through certain fellowships. And so I think it was an amalgamation of those experiences that led me to create like one program that has all of this together. Which is why we have systems, and we have, it's not therapeutic, we have a mix of all of that.
Understood. So, according to you, what is the best possible way to resolve financial trauma within someone?
Mm. I think really sitting with the question of what is my relationship to money and where is that coming from? Uh, and kind of almost like think of it as a table. Where am I right now and where do I want to be? Kind of spending time with that question is the first step to even like diagnosing financial trauma.
I like how you've presented the root cause of it. The third question goes like, if you had to help a high performer or a high achieving woman understand that she needs to heal herself to transform another phase of her life, how would you address that with her?
Mm. I would start with what her challenges are, and really try to understand how she sees and how she frames her challenges, right? And challenges could mean lack of career progression, lack of peace at heart, maybe conflict with the partner, right? Really start from where she's at, and then lead her through the process of diagnosis.
And when you were into, like, you have attended one of the country's most prestigious school, whether at Harvard or whether it be Indian School of Business, do you think the culture that you were around in shaped you positively or negatively to vouch for things that you are currently vouching for?
Mm. I think a mix of both. I think in both spaces, it was not a trauma literate environment. Uh, it was, especially Indian School of Business, very competitive. Uh, so on the positive side, it gave me lots of opportunities and exposure. I am the person I am because of the exposure I got from all of those, the credibility, the recognition, just my own internal confidence, my networks. But I think that both spaces were not very trauma literate, and my whole body and my whole my whole psyche struggled because of that. And so over the years, I've really learned to delineate both. Like, you can have very enriching professional experiences and be traumatized for the rest of your life. So really, that's one of my passion for why we need trauma literate system. We can have an education, an amazing university, and still be very trauma informed. How do we do that?
I love how you've touched a very deep notion about it, and it's in a very precise manner, but a very deep notion that even the world's best institutions do not offer that trauma educated and rooted environment. And so the next question goes like, since you are a founder and you run your own company, what is the difference between the culture that you have provided to your employees versus other companies who do not treat trauma or mental health or DEI as priority in their ecosystem?
Mm. I'll go back to psychological safety. I think that's paramount. That's like foundational. And what does a psychological safety mean, right? It means people can be as they are. They can be authentic in their own identities, and they're not being punished for it, right? They can share. Like, my employees can say, you know what, I'm feeling super demotivated today. Like, I'm struggling with it, and I would look at it as data for how that person is, and then how do we kind of help them do the work that has to happen. What else, like, do we need to do? What kind of support systems do we need, right? So a lot of that psychological safety is completely like foundational, which I haven't had in any of the other organizations that I've worked with before starting Parity Lab.
I really appreciate the transparency with this. And the last question would be, what is one advice that you would like to have for your kids since they are very young?
Mm, mm. I think my only prayer for them has always been that they know how to be happy. And I don't mean happy from like, oh, be happy all the time. But I think learning to be happy is a very it, it's a skill. It's a skill, like we teach people how to aspire to be like all this, like, kind of ambitious people, and we teach people all this, but somehow we have forgotten track of how to be just happy. And I mean happy in the small things, happy to see the bird, like finding that happiness inside your soul, right? Like deep inside your soul. That's something hope that I really hope that she and like my two girls can always find that, even when things are all over the place, they're not succeeding, the whole world has collapsed, they still find ways to be internally, like deeply inside, this trust that they can be happy.
Thank you for being very honest about it. And I love how it's beautiful to know that like you are very honest about they should find happiness because that's the crux of a lot of things in life and the solution to a lot of problems as well. And since we've touched on different emotions, would you like to deep dive on a topic that you felt we missed, or do you think this is something that should be addressed or reiterate on something?
Hmm. I hope the listeners will really take the time to sit with something they find, joy doing today or whenever the episode goes out. we punish ourselves a lot for finding joy, as if it's like, we feel very guilty doing things we enjoy doing. But I hope they will just take 10 minutes out of their day to do something they find a lot of joy in. And yes, please follow Parity Lab. We're doing a lot of over this year, especially. We're launching an online platform, and we're introducing a lot of shorter form workshops. So please follow us, and I would love to like engage with a lot more folks who are interested in this topic.
Oh, thank you so much for this, and I've
Yeah.
literally enjoyed the conversation about this. The episode goes live soon, and we also have come up with YouTube Live, which is micro fab,
Mm,
wherein we deep dive with a 25-minute capsule conversation about two topics at max, and go extremely deep with the execution, the thought process, the strategy behind things. So we're trying to do it. Trying to be live every like on a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. That's the time. So, and I'd love for you to be a part of that deep dive conversation as well. It I learned so many different things doing this, and if we had to close, what would be a perspective that you would like to share before we close the conversation?
mm. Yeah, stay intentional, and I hope listeners find the courage to really listen to their heart. I think it really boils down to that. We know what we want deep in our hearts, and I hope we can all find the courage to do that.
Thank you so much for this. This was very
Yeah,
deep.
I love talking to you, Yukta. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this.